Ring the bell, ring the bell, ring the bell down there. Ring the bell, ring the bell, ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for justice. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for culture. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for freedom. Ring the bell down there. I said to ring up the bell for the rabbits of freedom. Ring the bell down there. Bring it all over. Bring it all over. Bring it all over. Bring it all over. Hey. Come on, brother leader. It's high time that you summon up the power. This time, bust it in the air bell. Well, look, I have a story to tell. Well, it's a long time now we fighting for freedom. Victory bound to come. Assemble the people, we sight up the mission. We rock the rhapsodydom. Ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for justice. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for culture. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for freedom. Ring the bell down there. I said to ring up the bell for the rhapsodydom. Ring the bell down there. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Ring it all over. Hey. So listen well, I come to deliver this word. Let the voice of the dumb press be heard over the world. Let the people's story be told. Well, it's a long time now we come out for action. Glory days come down. I come with my bell just a second. The motion rock the rhapsodydom. Whoa, I ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell, ring the bell. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for justice. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell for culture. Ring the bell down there. Ring the bell.
Spotify button.
Okay, Dion.
Right. Good morning to you, members of the media, members of the Working People's Alliance panel, Dr. David Hines, co-leader, Brother Rohit Kanai, co-leader of the Working People's Alliance, Dr. Dennis Canterbury, Brother Takuma Ogunse, and I see with us this morning Sister Naomi and
Brother Rohit Kanai also is on the panel.
Yeah, I did call Brother Rohit. Yeah, right.
You don't necessarily have to call the media. They'll identify themselves.
Okay. Yeah, but I want to welcome them, to the people who are online at this press conference. Welcome. We take the usual approach to dealing with matters pertaining to the political and economic life of Guyana, having Dr. Hines read the press release, and then we take comments from Brother Takuma and Brother Rohit Kanai. And so without further ado, I hand you over to Dr. Hines, who will read the WPA's press release.
Good morning to members of the media and the general public. WPA is not surprised that GECOM's chair has sided with the PPP commissioners to deny the use of biometrics at the upcoming general and regional elections. We see this decision as a fatal blow against free, fair, and credible elections in Guyana. If it prevails, Guyana would be entering an election whose outcome would be in question even before the first ballot is cast. This, for the WPA, is a sure recipe for disorder, which could hang around the neck of the country for a long time. As the chair opined, there is no law that prevents GECOM from using biometrics at the election, a view that the opposition-nominated commissioners have long advanced. She further contends that the use of fingerprints derived from this process as the sole form of identification is unconstitutional. Thus, there is need for legislation to facilitate its implementation. While WPA would like to hear a judicial review of this ruling, we have long supported a move to the National Assembly to pass the necessary legislation in time for the pending election. We still believe this is the best, fair, and just route open to GECOM, even with the time left before the election is constitutionally due. We note that after our legal explanation, the chair deems as inadequate the time left to facilitate legislation and the required logistics as the ultimate reason for our ruling against the use of the mechanism. WPA finds this utterly ridiculous from a chairperson who for over 4 years repeatedly denied a review of the last election and dragged our feet on the commission's consideration of the substantive matter of biometrics. The chair cannot have it both ways. You cannot frustrate the process for 4 years and then argue that it's too late to act now. WPA says emphatically that the delay in putting in place this necessary guardrail against electoral fraud, as detected by the recount of the 2020 election, is solely the cause and responsibility of GECOM's chair and the PPP commissioners acting separately or together. In light of what amounts to deliberate and willful delay tactics by these actors, WPA cannot accept this ruling as the final say on the matter. We urge GECOM to immediately begin the process outlined by the chair and amass the necessary resources needed for its speedy implementation. The choice presented by the chair of a compromised election that meets the constitutional deadline versus a credible election that may not meet that deadline is a false and dangerous choice. The remit of GECOM is to ultimately conduct elections that satisfy the asset test of free and fair elections, free from fear and intimidation, and which are consistent with modern democratic norms and international best practices. Towards this end, WPA calls on the joint opposition to reject the chair's ruling and aggressively mobilize public opinion and action to pressure GECOM to reverse it. What is at stake is more than just a routine election. The very national cohesion of our nation is on the line. WPA says unequivocally that there cannot be any credible election without, at a minimum, biometrics, a credible voters list, and an impartial GECOM machinery. The 2025 budget. Like the rest of the nation, WPA is digesting the recent budget presented by the government last Friday. To be fair to all concerned, the budget needs to be analyzed against both its individual parts and in its totality. Towards this end, WPA searched for a common thread or threads that informed the spending allocations advanced by the government. We cannot make an informed judgment on the overall budget outside of this important guide. Unfortunately, but not surprisingly, WPA could not find anything that binds the budget together beyond a not so veiled attempt to foist on the nation a party campaign document in the guise of a national budget. To begin with, the minister's presentation to the National Assembly sounded more like a PPP rally at Babu Jan rather than a presentation to the legislative body. Second, a cursory look at the sectoral allocations reveals an eclectic, incoherent list of financial sweeteners clearly aimed at dazzling the nation into a false state of gratefulness, while the government continues its well-known practice of using the state coffers to transfer the bulk of the wealth to favored sectors at the expense of others not deemed to be fellow travelers. Third, the allocations continue the sickening and callous habit of ignoring the role of budgets in underdeveloped countries such as Guyana in addressing the process of poverty alleviation as a chronic impediment to development. Even without an exhaustive study, WPA cannot give the budget a passing grade as far as its intent to confront poverty in a holistic manner. Poverty alleviation cannot be facilitated by a basket of election gimmicks as represented by this budget. This is not a budget for the poor. Fourth, the clear and present challenge of mitigating the skyrocketing cost of living has been shortchanged by this budget. While the government dangled the usual list of indirect measures, it failed to significantly put a discernible increase in disposable income in the hands of especially those in the lower income brackets. For example, the meager increase in old age pension, along with a slight raise in the income tax threshold and other tax relief measures, represent a mere drop in the bucket for the poor. Why the delay in publishing the census? WPA knows that Vice President Jagdeo, in his attempt to sidestep questions regarding the delay in publishing the population census, which is now more than 2 years overdue, claims that the political opposition in Guyana is only concerned with the population census because they want to see how much the Indian Guyanese population has declined. WPA asks, why not? In a racialized society where citizens generally vote along ethnic lines, it is imperative that the ethnic breakdown of the population be known. Knowledge of the ethno-racial composition of the population is also of critical significance, given Guyana's bicommunal profile and the attendant socioeconomic challenges. Having said that, WPA wishes to point out that the population census is also of vital importance to the formulation of public policy. Knowledge of the size and age structure of the population is essential in helping government in its macroeconomic assumptions. The Guyana National Population and Housing Census 2022 was officially launched in August of 2022. The National Assembly approved a supplemental budget of $2 billion for Census Day, September 15th, 2022, and the 3-month-long numeration period under the theme, We Counting. Why the delay in publishing the census? WPA calls on the PPP government to stop playing politics with the census and have it published immediately. We should not go to another election without the publication of the census. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hines, for the reading of the press release. I'll ask now Brother Takuma Ogunse to briefly comment on the release. Brother Ogun?
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Thank you, Brother Chair. The WPA is very concerned, as we stated in the, as we point out in the statement, we ask our partners in the joint opposition to reject the GECOM's chair's position that biometrics cannot be put in place in time to have these elections. The WPA wish to urge our colleagues in the joint opposition and the masses of opposition supporters that this is a serious matter and that we have to draw the line in the sand on this matter. And we believe that it is not a gone conclusion that there will be no biometrics. We believe that the fate of biometric lies in the ability of the opposition and their supporters to give the appropriate and proper response by mass protests in the streets to make the point that we have drawn our feet in the sand on this matter. Failing to do that, we will only have ourselves to blame for whatever is the impact that decision will have on the outcome of the elections. In terms of the budget, which was read on Friday, the WPA, of course, will be making more comprehensive responses to the budget. But what struck me very strongly, and I went back to check it out, because I remember on Walter Rodney Grounding's program in response to the PPP 2020 budget, they highlighted that in 2025, old age pension will be 50,000 Guyana dollars. And I check it. So what we have here now, we are in 2025, and the PPP have failed to deliver that important manifesto promise. And this is a party that normally boasts of being consistent in implementing manifesto promises. And this, to me, is a great crime against the elderly. Because the fact of the matter is that the elderly have served this nation. And in a real way, a percentage of them will die before the next budget. And to deny them the 50,000 and more in the light of oil money and plenty is criminal political behavior, which cannot and should not be accepted. The PPP should not be allowed to get away with not implementing, at least at minimum, the manifesto promise of 50,000 Guyana dollars to old age pensioners in 2025. We are of the view that old age pensioners, given light of oil and oil money, should get a much more significant increase. There's another aspect of the budget which I was trying to work out clarity on. This announcement that newly arrivals into the population, births that come, I assume, from the time the budget was announced, the parent of the offspring would receive 100,000 Guyana dollars. What is not clear is the real objective of this policy. While we have no problem in policies that brings money in the hands of people, given the poverty-stricken nature of the country and the condition of the majority of people who are among the poor and the powerless, as a political party, we have to apply some stringent measures and judgment on government policy. The government ought to announce exactly what they expect the outcome of this. Are they implementing this as a permanent policy to impact population? And of course, the population impact of this measure would only be felt many, many years in the future. And as it stands, it seems to be clearly an election gimmick intended to get votes for this year. But what is not clear is whether this is going to be a permanent policy, because we know that governments could implement in one budget a policy, and in another budget, they change that policy. So I hope by the time the budget discussion is over in the parliament, that we have clarity on this important matter. We need to know whether this is a permanent feature of Guyanese life or whether it's just a feature for this year elections. And those are my immediate comments.
Thank you very much, Brother Takuma. Now I hand you over to Brother Rohit Kanai. Brother Rohit.
Thank you, Brother Chair. Since its inception, the WPA has been based on a struggle for national unity. And what this budget seems to portray is national disunity. It is nothing short of an electioneering budget intended to sow division in the nation. The WPA's proposal for a national basic income seeks to alleviate the suffering of the poor and give them the means by which they can move themselves up the social ladder. This budget certainly does not intend to achieve that goal. What we have seen more than anything is people scrambling for crumbs instead of a national policy intended to share the oil wealth in an equitable manner in the nation. Turning the budget into an electioneering gimmick sows division amongst the people. And as our release points out, if the elections do not lead to national unity because of the way it is being handled, then it will pave the way for national disunity. We have to do everything to struggle for national unity in whatever form it takes. And the budget, as it seems, is providing a pathway by the struggle against it for people to come together for the betterment in their lives. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen, for your presentations. I'm now going to ask the media to float their questions, and if you need someone specific to answer, you may indicate, or just ask the question and someone appropriate will respond.
Patlada Marshall from News Source. Dr. Hines spoke about the need for the opposition to press for the issue to be brought back on the agenda and for biometrics to be utilized during the upcoming elections, press GECOM to have that. And if I heard clearly, there was a call for mass protests. Now, the opposition, I don't know if it still happens, but at least up to last year, there were protests happening in front of GECOM, but not to the magnitude that one would expect. It's usually a small crowd of people. Do you think this is an issue, a major of an issue that Guyanese would really rally around? And if so, could you elaborate for me? What needs to be done to muster the support the opposition is looking to have in order to bring about the necessary action or reaction it is looking for?
Well, as the protest in front of GECOM that has been ongoing is really the initiative of individuals rather than the parties. The parties have never mobilized in large numbers to protest in front of GECOM. And I suppose this is consistent with the position of the leader of the opposition, that he is careful about mass protests in public. However, we feel that we have now reached a point where the very fabric of the nation is being threatened. WPA wishes to say very, very clearly, if you go to this election in 2025 without the demands of half of the electorate being met, or you force them to go to an election in which they are not satisfied with the rules, you are playing with trouble. So our first appeal is to the government. And we are not the only one. The private sector had a meeting with Vice President Jack Dio, as he reported, and they had the same fear. And he said he assured them that the PPP is not for violence, and he also, in a veiled way, not so veiled way, assured them that the state would crack down on any attempts at disorder. So I think more and more people are beginning to come to grips with the fact that you are playing with trouble. You are playing with trouble. And so therefore, what is going to be different from what we see weekly in front of GECOM is that the opposition would have to treat this matter as a state of emergency and mobilize its supporters across the country to take mass action. So the point I'm making is that whereas the weekly protest in front of GECOM, it has the blessings of the opposition, but the opposition has not deliberately mobilized people to go there. WPA is saying to the opposition, the time has come now that you have to mobilize, deliberately mobilize your supporters to take mass action. And we think that that would make a difference.
Are you done, Ms. Marshall?
On the budget, I know reference is made to it being, an election budget to pull support. Reference was made to the increases offered to pensioners and public assistance, and also the increase in the threshold. What would the WPA would have done different? What would have been the WPA's alternative budget? In, focusing on major issues that you think would impact Guyanese directly.
The first thing that we would have implemented a universal basic income, Svetlana. We are very clear about that. And we have said that a universal basic income, based on our estimation, each household in Guyana should be getting at a minimum $1 million Guyanese. That would have been part of a WPA budget. And we feel that once you implement a universal basic income, it would be a supplement to the small increases that you have there. The increases as they stand there, they do not amount to an easing of the cost of living on the part for the people of Guyana, in particular the poor, nor does it point to a process of poverty alleviation. And we are saying that the major focus for the WPA of any budget is to tackle those two chronic issues: the issue of the high cost of living and the issue of poverty. And so therefore, front and center of a WPA budget would have been the introduction of a universal basic income as a supplement to the relatively small increases that you see in the budget there.
In addition to what Dr. Hines said there, I think that one of the things we need to recognize is that, and this is what we would do differently, is that the budget process, as it was done here in the 2025 budget, was fairly subjective and arbitrary, with where the objectives were not being identified from a sort of scientific perspective. Now, in line with what Dr. Hines has said, to do this thing scientifically, it means you need to have the things we've been calling for. You need to have studies to understand the basis for the allocations to the various sectors. We need to know, for example, through these scientific studies, the who are vulnerable in the population, the size of the vulnerability. We need to know, for example, the cause, why these people are vulnerable. What are the several details we need to find from scientific observations before we can actually move on to formulate such a budget. Now, the second observation we can look at is, through scientific study, we could also determine the macroeconomic constraints such as unemployment, inflation, interest rates, which it would seem to me, which can limit the performance of the budget in terms of its achieving its objectives. And so we find that in the absence of these studies, the constraints on this budget are not really clear. And because the constraints aren't clear, we don't know for a fact how you can achieve the stated goals of the budget. So you might just be throwing money, you just be wasting money throwing it around. Also, a final observation is that, and this is what we will do differently, is that there is no clear procedures for reviewing the expenditure policies in the budget. So there is an indication from, for example, that when you have all of these programs, you're spending so much of money, you're throwing so much of money in for social spending, infrastructure, etc. What's the process of review? Are we going to be able to say, and not only review, but what's the process of making adjustments? So you see the thing isn't going good, and therefore we adjust so that we could spend the money wisely. So all of these things are missing in this current budget, and many, many more that we could look at when we do a better study of it. But then at the same time, we're saying that because these things are absent, if we were given the opportunity in response to the question to prepare a budget for Guyana, we would ensure that all of these things are included. And these are very basic things, you know, the process of review of your objective to see whether they're working or not.
If I may follow up on Dr. Somebody was coming in there.
Oh, I was about to make a point.
Yeah, go ahead.
That one of the things the WPA will do different is that we will reverse the present policy where the greater part of the budget is being spent on infrastructure. We will strive for a better balance between infrastructural development and social money directed to the social sector. And we must be clear, budget is not innocent instruments. Budget is instruments that is being used, okay, to build classes and to strengthen class interests. And when the budget is fashioned in a way where over 60% of the budget is directed into infrastructure, okay, it benefits the private sector in the main, they don't complain, and it helps to strengthen a class who accumulates wealth and capital on the basis of taxpayers' money, and at the same time, it impoverishes the great majority of people who are the owners of the national purse, okay, and pauperize them. So budgets are not simple instruments. And to continually spending huge budgets in the trillions in a way that discriminates against human development is a crime against humanity. And we will have quickly put a halt to that. And we will also, okay, allocate more resources to agencies that are responsible to investigate and to supervise, okay, government spending. We would have probably resurrected SARA. We would have strengthened SUKU, so that as we spend these large sums, our ability to protect the people's money and to prosecute wrongdoers, thieves of the people's money, okay, is more assured. So we would have been moving in those directions.
If I may follow up on my colleagues' interventions, the WPA cannot sit here and say we would have put so much money here and so much money here. What we are saying is that our priorities would have been different. Our priority would have been poverty alleviation, mitigating cost of living. In terms of the expenditure on education, for example, we have no quarrel with the expenditure on education, but our priorities would have been different. A lot of the education expenditure is going towards buildings and all of that. And WPA is saying that our priority in education would have been much more human related. We would have dealt with prioritize the question of teachers' wages. We would have prioritized the issue of decreasing illiteracy in our schools. We would prioritize attendance at school. We have almost 50% dropout rate in our secondary schools. We would have prioritized that. The point we are making is that we would have looked at the problems in a holistic and broad way, and our expenditures would have arisen from those priorities. The same with healthcare. All right, the government boasts of hospitals, and it seems to be pumping more money into buildings. And our priority would not be just buildings. Our priority would be more to have in our country the kind of technology, for example, that is going to improve healthcare in our country. We would spend money in trying to retain our nurses, for example, to prevent them. That means wages would have been a priority for us in the health sector. We also would have looked at the areas that are most vulnerable to a poor healthcare system, and to spend more money in some areas than other areas so that we can bring a sense of equity and equality in the provision of healthcare. So our priorities is what would have been different from this government, and our priorities then would lead to the kind of expenditure that we would have allocated. Take the expenditure on GECOM, for example. The government has put a hefty sum to GECOM. What are they hoping to achieve? We are faced with a crisis in GECOM. Underproduction. We are producing sugar at an enormously higher cost than the rest of the world produces it. So in a sense, what we are doing is that we are subsidizing the buyers of our sugar. When you pump that amount of money into GECOM without any clear indication how that money is going to be used, whether it is going to be used to make GECOM a profit-making sector for the country, or are you just subsidizing those who buy our sugar and perhaps the supporters of your party? Or are you trying to make GECOM an economically feasible sector or industry? These are the things that are missing from this budget. There are no clear priorities. Monies are just being thrown left, right, and center. And at the end of the day, the budget does not present a coherent and sensible orientation as far as we are concerned. So the WPA, our priorities would have been different, and the country would have known clearly where and how the money is being spent. The issue of old age pension, for example, has been raised by my colleagues here. That is a burning question. We are stopping people from working very early. You know, in other countries, people retire at age 65 to 70. In Guyana, we retire people at age 55, so people are living longer. All right? And so when you keep old age pension so low, you are putting a lot of our old people in a lot of distress for a long period of time. You retire at 55 and you die at 85. It's 30 years. And you're asking people for 20, 30 years to live on $40,000, $41,000 a year. A mere $41,000 per week, per month, sorry. A mere $5,000 increase. You multiply, divide $5,000 by 12 months, and you, by 30 days, sorry, and you will see, really, the old people are getting nothing. When you take that against the background of the cost of living, then it is a pittance. And so therefore, we are saying that where this government is going wrong is that it has no priorities as far as poor people are concerned, as far as the majority of people are concerned. This government is not concerned about holistic and equitable development of our people. It is concerned mainly with remaining in office, keeping its friends in the private sector happy, and trying to pull wool over the eyes of the people with these percentages. You know, the government is spending billions of dollars. But those billions of dollars, when you take them down to the individual, it's not billions, it's not thousands, it's just a small drop in the bucket.
Okay, Ms. Paris has had her hand up for quite a while, so I'm going to give her the opportunity now to ask a question. Go right ahead.
Good morning. Is everyone hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, we are. Clearly.
Yeah, so my first question is for Dr. Hines. You mentioned, well, you basically called for mass action in regards to GECOM. Could this be interpreted as an attempt to intimidate or disrupt the electoral process? Also, how does your party justify such actions? And do you believe this approach is conducive to a peaceful resolution?
I will ignore the first question and go to the second question, which I've answered, but I'll repeat it, right? Our justification is, and we are saying the private sector has shared this concern. Our concern is that half of the electorate has been calling for biometrics, for a clean voters list, and for an impartial GECOM. And you ignore those calls. So you are going into an election with half the population being dissatisfied. If that is not a justification, then we don't know what is. WPA does not want to be the bearers of bad news. We do not want, after the elections, when disorder, and it has happened in previous elections, when there is disorder, we don't want to say, we told you so. So we are saying, before you get there, clean up the mess now, before the election. Correct the problems now, before the election. Look, 1964, all of the elections between 68 and 92, the 92 election, the 1997 election, the 2001 election. 2006 was the only election we didn't have post-election disorder. 2011, 2020. When are we going to learn that going into elections where the participants, the stakeholders are not all satisfied is a recipe for disorder? This is not a WPA's invention. I've quoted for you there the history of all elections between 64 and the present. Only one election, 2006. There was not post-election disorder. And we are saying it is time we stop this nonsense. And the GECOM chair cannot drag our feet. For 4 years, This matter has been on the agenda for 4 years. You wait until a few months before the election, and then you make a ruling, and then say, I don't have time. Why you couldn't make a ruling in 2021, which would have given you enough time to do the things that she has tabulated? WPA is saying very clearly, this situation that we have found ourselves in is the GECOM chair must be blamed, because it is clear that the PPP doesn't want biometrics. And so the chair has the casting vote. And she waited until this last moment to cast the vote. She makes a case for biometrics. She did. She said it's not against the law. She pointed out all the things that need to be done. But we don't have time to do it. Well, why you didn't make that ruling 3 years ago, 2 years ago, which would have given you more than enough time to do it? So WPA is not impressed that we want to, what's your question? We want to, cause problems in the elections. It's not the WPA that will cause problems in the elections. It is the dissatisfied supporters of the opposition who are going to cause problems, and the problems would be a defeat of GECOM and the PPP government. They're the ones who are going to be responsible for whatever disorder.
All right, I
want to make a quick comment on the part of the question that the reporter asked, because this is important. As an elderly person, and I watch the way in which politics is developing in Guyana and what the young people are exposed to. Young people are falling into the trap, and not only young people, the whole nation to some extent is falling to the PPP's trap, of projecting their mass demonstrations as something anti-democratic, violent, anti-constitution. The Constitution says that power ultimately lies in the people, and the people exercise that ultimate power through elections. They exercise that ultimate power through demonstrations in the streets, public assembly, and so forth. These are legitimate forms which we shed a lot of blood from slavery to indenture throughout the colonial period to achieve. So we can't have no set of politicians, whichever party they come from. If it reach a point where their behavior and their actions are threatening the nation or significant sections of the nation, and you're there between an election, you're going to wait 5 years, you're going to wait 2 and 3 years to the election before you make a statement and try to push back? No, the Constitution gives the people the right in between elections or any time in the electoral process to push back, with massive assemblies upon the streets and demonstration once it is being conducted within the framework of the law. So we should put this thing to rest. That when political people talk about, bringing people in the streets to give clout or to strengthen your political rhetoric. Because if you don't do that, all your arguments will fall upon the wayside. Because whoever empowers the rulers, all they got to do is continue to ignore your legitimate demands. And they will turn back and tell you, the people like what we're doing, because you can't bring your people up on the road. So to answer these problems, we have to bring people on the road, and we have to fight with our young people not to fall victim to this notion, whoever in power, that you surrender the right to resistance and public protest. It's a democratic right, it's a historic right where many of our people die in numbers from slavery to indenture. And the day a country, whether it's Guyana or any part of the world, the masses give up that right, they're going back into slavery.
And WPA wants to say emphatically, we prefer demonstrations before an election to correct the problems in the election machinery than violence after the election. We want to note that GECOM went to the 2020 election without biometrics. And that opened the floodgate for voter impersonation. That is a fact. Go ask the police. Go ask the Attorney General. He has all the evidence there. And what happened after the election? 5 months. 5 months of delay. And in those 5 months, PPP supporters at Lusignan, at Bush Lot, at Bath Settlement, inflicted violence against police, against children. Are we going to wait until after the election for a repeat of that? If GECOM was conscientious, they would have said, we do not want a repeat of that 5 months. We do not want a repeat of what happened at Lusignan or Bath Settlement or Bushlat. And let us correct this thing. Instead, they've waited until the last moment, saying this thing is necessary. This thing is legal, but we don't have time. What nonsense is that? So I say again, we are calling for pressure. And mass demonstrations can take many forms. We are calling for pressure for GECOM to do what is right now so that it can prevent post-election disorder and possibly violence.
I just want to make one point to strengthen the argument Dr. Hines made in terms of GECOM. It is not for the GECOM to determine whether we have enough time. That's what GECOM is determined is to say, in order to have fair and free elections, and credible elections that will be accepted by all, we need these things, which include biometrics. And let the political party leaders, resolve the problem. It is not the responsibility of GECOM to deny biometrics. All GECOM needs to say is that this will help us. It's a tool we want, okay? And let the political parties decide how they're going to resolve the problem, not for GECOM to resolve that problem.
But Chair, I would like to address that question. Elections are supposed to bring national unity through a government. From 1953, universal suffrage, to the present, elections have divided us. We have fought over issues of scarcity. Now, with our oil resources, there is no need for that battle over scarcity. Now we're fighting over plenty. It's time Guyana and Guyanese understand that we have to come together as their various races to build Guyana. Otherwise, we will lose Guyana in whatever form it takes. Foreigners taking advantage of the situation until Guyanese can sit down and resolve the problem. What our election so far has shown is that we are at war with each other on the basis of racial representation. It's time to stop the nonsense. It has serious consequences for this nation. The opposition is treated as if it is not part of the nation. It is outside of the national government. That's not how the opposition is treated in a government. It's a legitimate part of the government. What the current government does is seek to undermine the opposition using even the budget to buy over opposition supporters. That's not the basis for national unity. We have to sit down as political parties and form a genuine government of national unity. All we're doing is skirting around the real issues that confront us. And until we mature as a nation to address this fundamental issue, we will keep using our oil resources to divide the nation. And there is no way one sector of the electorate will sit by and see itself excluded from the national wealth, as is glaringly being demonstrated. So it is time we address the issue of national unity. And more than that, we were supposed to have constitutional changes to address that fundamental issue. Nothing is being done to address that before the forthcoming elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Rohit. Any other questions?
I think Ms. Paris has a follow-up question, the honor follow-up questions.
Yes, I do have a question, but in relation to what you spoke about in regards to the budget and old age pension, can you explain why the WPA, while a part of the coalition administration, didn't lobby the then government to prioritize raising pensions for the elderly? And in the context that you're claiming right now, it's very urgent, this is something that needs to be addressed. So why not lobby back then, and you're only speaking about it now?
The assumption is that there was no lobby back then, and your assumption is wrong. Did the WPA favor raising old age pension? Yes. Was old age pension raised under the coalition? Yes. Was it raised to our satisfaction? No. Did the coalition government have the option of large oil revenues? No. Does this government have their hands on large oil revenue? Yes. Should the lobby against this government, should be lobby on this government for more increase, bigger increase for old age pension in light of the oil revenue, be more strident? Yes. WPA makes absolutely no apologies for a more strident lobby of this government for raise in old age pension because they have the money.
All right, just another follow-up here. You have been very vocal about not being satisfied with some of the things that had played out with the previous administration. On the topic of the coalition government and discussions being had among yourselves to relook at that, are you confident that do you believe that you guys would be sidelined again in a coalition administration?
Let me say this. Our ideal government for Guyana, as Brother Rohit Kanai has been saying here this morning, is a government of national unity that includes the PPP, PNC, and other parties. That is our ideal government. A coalition of some of the parties, in this case, the opposition parties, is our second best option. All right? We just want to make that very clear. Your question about being sidelined. If you're a small party, the potential for being sidelined in a coalition with big parties is real. It is real. The WPA is not foolish to believe that there would not be attempts to sideline us and other smaller parties in the present coalition that we are trying to form. We would not be foolish to believe that there would not be attempts to sideline us. That is life in politics. However, having learned from the mistakes of the previous coalition government, having learned from this PPP government that is assaulting the idea of a national government. We are trying to put ourselves in a position where we can have some guarantees before the coalition goes into the election. Some more guarantees than the ones we were able to get out of the last coalition. Look, politics are dynamic. And if you sit by and say, I will be sidelined, so I'm not going into a coalition, then you're shooting yourself all over, not just your feet, you're shooting yourself all over your body. You have to recognize that when you are taking major steps, that there are all possibilities that things like sidelining will occur. The WPA, if we are part of a coalition government going forward, would fight harder to ensure that we are not sidelined. We cannot sit here and tell you that there are going to be guarantees that we will not be sidelined. No. But what we can tell you is that we are going to fight any attempts to sideline us in any future coalition government more aggressively than we did under the previous coalition.
All right, just a quick follow-up. The issues that plague the coalition, they still remain unaddressed. Well, at least in the public domain. How would you say the same party, we're seeing the same faces, convince voters that a coalition is the best choice? And you mentioned that the WPA is going to fight a lot harder to not be sidelined. In regards to that, and in regards to your numbers, do you think that you can have a stronger voice this time around? Also, your youth involvement, does the WPA have a youth arm that we could see being a part of this?
WPA has never had a youth arm. A youth arm is not a requirement for political party. All right? That's the first thing. The second thing.
Are you saying that the WPA wouldn't engage the youths?
Of course, we engage the youth all the time. I'm engaging you. You are a youth.
but you're saying the WPA does not have a youth arm, and it's not something that you'd consider, basically.
The WPA has never had a youth arm. We have never had a women's arm. The WPA never had arms. You understand? I'm trying to give you a concept, right? Do we engage youth? I joined the WPA when I was 15 years old. And there are people who joined the WPA when they're young. Are you asking whether we engage young people, whether young people are part of our party? Yes. That doesn't mean that we have to have a youth arm. Secondly, the issues that plague the coalition are being considered. That is the point I am making. The issues that confronted the internal cohesion of the coalition are being considered. Why the preoccupation with the WPA numbers? Numbers of what? Numbers of people who will vote for us. When you are a part of the coalition, all the people that vote for the coalition vote for all the parties. What numbers are you talking about? Yes, the WPA does not have the same number of members. We are not able to mobilize the same number of people as the large parties. That is a fact. Does that mean that the WPA does not, or smaller parties do not have the right to speak up on issues, do not have the right to demand that governments do right by the citizens of this country? Where in the Constitution does it say size determines your right to free speech? Where in the Constitution does it say your numbers determine your right to serve your country? It is time that your young reporters start telling your editors, stop sending you all to these press conferences to make you all self fools by asking these nonsensical questions.
That's all my questions for today.
Thank you very much, Crystal. Thank you very much. And I hope that you consider joining the WPA to give us some more youth.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Hines, for responding to the questions and to the other members of the panel. Do we have any other questions from the media?
I think Sister Williams asked me a question last week. I didn't answer it correctly because it was muffled. Ms. Williams, can you repeat the question for my thing?
Sure, no problem. Good day, everyone. Williams Culture News.
Yes.
$5 billion US from the US Exim Bank, which would add to the country's continued growing debt, while ExxonMobil continues to walk away yearly without, and their partners continue to walk away yearly without paying millions of US dollars in taxes. What is your position of this, and are you of the view that the government should go after these taxes in order to alleviate the country's debt?
Yes. WPA, like all political parties and patriotic organizations in the country, would like to see more revenue coming to us from ExxonMobil and the oil companies. We are clearly not satisfied that we are getting enough from these oil companies. And we are totally in favor of continuing to raise these issues and to press these issues in the public domain, and that our government, this government, future government, find ways and means of amicably sitting down with Exxon and the other companies and working out a better deal for our country. We do not favor a confrontation with Exxon. We want to make that very clear. We do not favor confrontation with any investors coming into our country. We are of the view that all contracts are eligible to be renegotiated. And so therefore, renegotiation is always part of our agenda and should be always part of the country's agenda. And we would continue to press and to support all struggles in that direction to ensure that we get more from Exxon. We are, however, realistic. These are not issues that are going to come about because we say it should be so, or because we holler at Exxon every day. WPA feels that we should use leverage that we have built up. One, we are saying that we have much more oil reserves than the oil companies are telling us and that the government is telling us. WPA has said that we feel that we have up to 30 billion barrels of oil. The government has put it a little less than that. I think they said somewhere around 24 billion barrels. Clearly, Exxon is not saying how much. We saw recently where Exxon said there's so much in the Stabroek block, and then Hess said they think it's more, and so on. All right? My point is that we should use the oil reserves that we have as leverage to get more from the oil companies. We're also saying that when we speak on these matters, we cannot speak on these matters as individual parties or individual organizations. We have to have a national approach to this question of getting more from the oil companies. We feel that this business of the government in charge sitting across the table from powerful companies like Exxon is really nonsensical. That the government should include the opposition, it should include civil society organizations, it should include experts and other individuals to sit down there. Exxon is going to behave differently if, when it looks across the table, it sees representatives from the major political parties, minor political parties, civil societies, it sees a national front. And so, yes, we would prefer that we get more from Exxon, whether in taxes or other ways. Yes. No. In terms of the national debt, WPA has said that debt is something that governments across the world use as a means of accumulating capital for developmental projects. And so therefore, we are not against the government borrowing per se. We have, as I said, we feel we have 30 billion barrels of oil. That's collateral. And so therefore, you could borrow against that. However, it is what you do with the money when you borrow it. And that is where we have a massive quarrel with this government, is that you are borrowing a lot of money, and we are not seeing how that money that you are borrowing is bringing dividends to the country, which can help us repay the debt. The point I'm making is that we don't necessarily have to wait on more money from Exxon to repay our debt. If you borrow money for a project, you have to show how that project is going to be able to generate revenues to help to repay the debt. And so that is why we are hesitant to link the fact that Exxon we are not getting more from Exxon with repaying the debt. We would not want to depend on taxes from Exxon to repay debt for loans. You're borrowing money to build a bridge. That bridge should be able to generate the necessary revenues to pay back the debt. And so, yes, we do not necessarily link the non-payment of more taxes by Exxon and the other companies to the repayment of the debt.
All right, thanks, Dr. Hines. Is that the final question from the media?
That's it for me. Thank you.
Okay. All right, then. I want to thank the panelists for their contributions this morning. It's now afternoon, and I want to thank the media for being here with us again.
Your audio is gone.
You're talking to me, David?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Your audio went.
Yes. Oh. Yes. It's the internet. The internet is unstable. That's what.
Oh, okay.
With us again, and we look forward to being with you next week, same time when we have another press conference of the Working People's Alliance. We're hopeful that by some means that the things that we have them realize so that the benefits can come to them. Do have a blessed afternoon, and see you next week.
Thank you.